Welcome to this very special edition of Animal Education Podcast. Today we have a very special guest, Grant Fowlds. Grant Fowlds is a renowned conservationist, author, and speaker dedicated to the preservation of Africa's wildlife and ecosystems. A passionate advocate for endangered species, particularly rhinos, Grant plays a leading role in Project Rhino, a collaborative initiative uniting organizations and individuals to combat poaching and promote sustainable conservation practices. Born and raised in South Africa, Grant has an intimate understanding of the land and its wildlife, which fuels his mission to protect these iconic species for future generations. He works tirelessly to educate communities, inspire global action, and implement initiative strategies for wildlife preservation. Through his work with Project Rhino and his outreach efforts, Grant has become a powerful voice in conservation, emphasizing the importance of collaboration, education, and proactive measures in safeguarding Africa's natural heritage. No, we've been crawling around your website a little bit, checking everything out, and the reserve, Amakala?
Don't ask me how.
Is it Amakala?
Amakala, yeah.
Yeah, and that was your property, your family's property, and you converted
part of it.
To a reserve?
Yeah, it's part of it. Amakala was part of our family property, but we don't like to take all the credit from what had happened because it was we built it with many other partners, land partners, neighbors. So it was originally ours, yeah.
And you're James, he just finished reading your book, by the way. He very much enjoyed it.
Yes. Okay. How did it go, James?
Great. It was, first of all, I haven't read a book in ages, so it was nice to actually read a book.
An actual
once.
book.
Yeah, but
Really?
also, it was really cool to actually learn about some more inner workings of how things go on over there. Because, I only really know about, zoos and stuff, because that's what we have over here in America. We have wild spaces, but it's kind of like we have a park, and we kind of hang out there, and that's kind of it.
Yeah, it's kind of contained. So that's one of the things we want. The rewilding and the corridors were two things we were kind of interested in because, of course, it's things we're trying to do here in certain areas as well. But how when in rewilding and getting the corridors connect those areas there, what are the biggest challenges you guys run? How does it happen, and what are the biggest challenges you run into there when trying to accomplish something like that?
Well, the biggest challenges we have is obviously space, because we're quite a developed country, and unfortunately, our law states that we have to have fences, whereas the rest of Africa largely have animals that belong to the state and they have no fences. So if we want a TOPS permit, which TOPS stands for Threatened or Protected Species, and that's anything, one of the big five, a giraffe or something that's very endangered, we have to have electrification, security, adequate fencing so that the animal doesn't get out and harm the community and its people, for example. So, that's the reason why we kind of hemmed in, if you like to call it a massive wildlife park. So even Kruger, they say at 2 million hectares, Kruger National Park is a massive wildlife park the size of the UK or bigger than Wales or whatever it is, Right. So, or as big as the state of Delaware, perhaps. I don't even know how Delaware is a small state, but Kruger National Park is 2 million hectares. That is 4.5 million acres, if you call it acres. So effectively corridors are a link, and a corridor can be in a city like New York,
You're cutting through very densely populated areas to connect to wildlife.
It can be incredibly densely populated, or it can be incredibly sparse, where there are little villages and the protected area or the land that is suitable for elephants or mega herbivores or monkeys or apes or chimpanzees or gorillas. They need a corridor to be able to escape out of that park to go and join another one, but they would not cross a dangerous road, or they would not cross a rural village or any settlement that endangers people and, wildlife. So at Amakala's case, it took us 25 years. We had smaller corridors, so underpasses, as you say in America, where a car would go through, and it scarcely would take an elephant or maybe a major antelope, but a car would squeeze through, or a buffalo would be able to go through. So we had 2 or 3 of those, and we kind of blocked them off because we didn't want our certain animals of value to be eaten of lions, and vice versa. Disease-free buffalo, there's a lot of diseases, so buffalo is perceived to be higher value, and lions perceived to be, loving disease-free buffalo, and they would eat your balance sheet basically. So this is how we overmanage populations of animals. But now we're looking at holistically, where the size matters, the same old, maybe Big Mac burger, size matters. So we're looking at creating space and hectares and the whole, the whole the whole smorgasbord or food chain of animals and predators, carnivores, mega herbivores, browsers, and grazers, all in one chain and in abundance as you go up, And for that, we have to have wider corridors where animals freely migrate and they're not under pressure. And that's what we've been able to achieve with the first underpass. And in America, you've got one in California, by the way, where the mountain lions are passing, So we're using large bridges and river systems where mega structures, could fit a Boeing or a big airplane underneath it, almost,
And that I know and maybe it's the one in California, there's somewhere where they've started over the roads, kind of building an overpass, but it's dirt and grass to encourage the animals to go up and over rather than
absolutely
across the street.
Yeah. And to make it look more natural so that the animal is not threatened. We've at Amakala now, we've put up several 40 camera traps because it's very interesting to research the amount of animals that are going through this underpass. And also, we find them on the other side, but we don't know how frequently they're coming to and fro.
Right.
So, the hippopotamus, for example, and the elephant, they were using it very freely, and now the lion and the cheetah and are going underneath these passes very freely, actually, because they know where they're going, and other predators like hyenas and things like that,
So you're getting a good mix, which I'm assuming is good for the ecosystem. You're seeing a good variety of from the bottom of the feeding chain to the top of the feeding chain. So
you want everything. And the other thing you must remember is that plains game, when I mean plains game, something like a zebra or a red hartebeest or a wildebeest, they're quite territorial. They don't migrate, with the exception of obviously Masai Mara and Serengeti. But in a reserve where they've kind of bred up statically, and they've got a large amount of predators, which we happen to have in ratio for the herds, the predators seem to naturally move the animals around, that they utilize more of the space that they have, and then they live specifically in their small groups. The group in the east does not go and visit the one in the west. They kind of stay in small subgroups, all kept by a dominant male. Invariably, a stallion with a zebra and a dominant male with the impala, or a dominant male with red hartebeest with other submales in it. So it's quite an interesting dynamic between a migration, with springbuck migrated in the history days before fences. Black wildebeest migrated in their hordes. In the Serengeti, blue wildebeest are migrating along with zebras and other things. In southern Sudan now, through Africa parks, we're seeing the migration they say the largest on earth, 6 million white-eared cob in southern Sudan, in a war-torn area. But luckily, for the first time ever, war-torn countries in Africa have actually helped the animals, because they've been able to survive without being killed by bushmeat, And also migration of the largest mammal migration is in northern Zambia, which are bats, obviously. And, they can fly. At least they're not,
right.
They don't need a migratory pattern,
Right.
And obviously birds have got their own corridor, which is the sky, but terrestrial animals need, vitally important, that they have these underpasses or culverts or drainage lines or valleys or things that make them feel like they're safe,
Right.
I'm talking too much, huh?
No. That's perfect.
Yeah.
Well, do you have any specific questions about the book or?
That was reminding me of the all wildlife corridors, because we have a little bit, like,
right.
you saw something about the pronghorn, right?
Yeah.
That we've been getting them more pathways because they migrate.
Right.
So we've been getting some.
I guess we've had here. Organizations have been buying up cattle land and converting it into rewilding it and creating corridors. And in our case, they're having to take down the fences because, of course, the fences are the pronghorns are getting stuck in the fences and getting wounded and damaged. So we're having kind of the opposite thing. As we scoop up land, we're having to tear down fences. You're having to put up the fences.
No, don't get me wrong. We're doing exactly the same as what you're doing in Utah and in Colorado. We're breaking the fences down because we realize that we are restricting animals, partnerships and animals, by putting up more fences and starting to breed them in paddocks like domestic animals. So we're doing the same thing, but the law states that when you are private farmers or even national parks or provincial parks, you have to have a certificate of adequate enclosure to get a license, same as your license for driving or anything. We have to have a CAE, we call it, to be able to contain the animals, and then you're only allowed to import them. So they need an export permit and an import permit, very strictly controlled, by the way,
Right.
So it's a controlled system rather than the uncontrolled system where in Zambia, anywhere in the wild, or in Angola, or in Sudan, or in Democratic Republic, all of a sudden you see a lion walking through your yard, you don't know where it came from,
Right. Well, that's not good for the people. It's also not good for the lion, I would assume.
Yeah.
So in a way, the fences are, yes, it's hemming them in, but it's also keeping them from those populated areas, which can just kind of get them in trouble.
Yeah.
Wildlife in trouble. Yeah.
So our ecotourism product has actually thrived because we're not a wildlife park. We're a natural park where animals hunt and eat, and they exist in an ecosystem where we have lodges which are sometimes smarter or average or carefully situated, that the guest feels that they're in the wild, and they go on controlled drives on a Land Rover, which is a hang of a lot better than a wildlife park, but it still isn't as good as the wildest area in Africa, which has its own problems because they have civil war and they have no connectivity of flights, or there's malaria, or it's a large hunting preserve and people don't feel safe to go with children. So it's quid pro quo, it's six of one and half a dozen of the others.
Do you have to monitor much for poaching within the bounds of your property, or do people kind of stay out since they know it's monitored and controlled? They don't.
Poaching is a massive problem, and it all comes down to what region you're living in. If you're in a populated environment, so Amakala is in the Eastern Cape, which is less populated. Most of my work is in a very populated area of KwaZulu-Natal, which has the largest indigenous people, being the Zulu people, and the density of their housing and their villages is enormous. So, and the population is very unemployed. 45 to up to 90% unemployed. So, empty stomachs have no ears. The people will go in and take if they don't have employment. So our job is to actually educate them that a dead animal is worthless. It's going to fill you once, but a live animal is going to fill you over time and time again. And it's going to give you money for your family every day, and and it's not dangerous. What is perceived to be dangerous is not.
Is there any? Was it you that mentioned, or I had seen on somewhere on the website, that some reserves are actually using the native indigenous people to help kind of run and oversee, so that gives them kind of a vested interest, an additional vested interest, I guess.
Absolutely, yeah, it's very important. Colonial Africa is not really the flavor of the day as we've gone from north to south. So colonialism has gone out of the window. And while it's still run by a couple of European people with knowledge of maybe the Western world and how things operate, it's the local people that need to be empowered, and the local people that are more in tune with what happens in nature. And they've grown up in nature. I'm very fortunate that I happen to have come from that background. So I speak indigenous languages, and I've had the growing up of that. But a lot of the people need to be empowered. They need to have ownership. They must be involved in owning their own animals, like they do with their cattle, and run their own lodges and have their own walking safaris and walking trails and all the peripheral work that comes with it, from crafts and transport to the reserve, and working in the room service and chefs and all those sort of things that are spin-offs to conservation.
Excellent.
Yeah, it's because like in America, it's kind of different because we basically don't have poaching. Like it's because we don't
have the big game.
Yeah, and
really,
then like our native population is basically just in a couple, like they have reservations. We don't really have the native population like we used to.
One of the things we're trying to do, particularly in our area in the Midwest, is the bison.
Yes. So actually, kind of speaking of, we kind of almost have our own version of a reserve. We have an old ammunition factory near us has been returned to a prairie, and now we have bison. We have a herd of bison there. It's kind of like they're contained in this, I don't know, like 45-mile wide prairie.
It's kind of like a large area, fenced, but within that, they're allowed to live effectively wildly.
Yeah, I mean, they're monitored, especially because they are the only wild is a stretch, but
it's fine.
Wild population of bison that we have. Because I mean, bison is our megafauna. All of our other megafauna, like we had mammoths and lions and stuff, but they all went extinct at the end of the Ice Age. So
yeah.
For the do rhinos migrate? Would rhinos use a corridor, or the rhinos kind of in a spot?
They require, I mean, black rhinos require a lot of land. In other words, 1,000 hectares per animal, roughly. Obviously, black rhino is more solitary. They do come together, female and calf, and male, female, and calf when the cow comes into estrus, when it's ready for the bull. So that's the only time you're going to see a lot of black rhino together. But white rhinos are very herd dominant. They can be in a crash. We call it a crash of 5, 6, 7. I've seen them up to 18. And they wouldn't migrate. They're very territorial. The bulls actually go around spraying and marking, and they also use middens. So rhinos, black and white. I'm talking about African varieties now. they use middens, so they defecate in one particular area on their home range. So they wouldn't use miles and miles of land. They would just use their prescribed pressure that they have to utilize. And then obviously the male that comes into that area from the dominant male, he gets shunted around, and threatened and poked if he's got a horn. If he doesn't have a horn, he gets picked up and thrown all over the place. So yeah, the blacks are very aggressive and the whites are very passive, but they have been known to actually each be quite unpredictable in the wild.
And any particular, I know, did you say, well, I guess to both of you, that you've seen some recovery in the rhino population across the continent, but they're still endangered, I assume, sit on the endangered level.
Yeah, the black rhino are critically endangered. There are about 5,000 left in the world. And then the white rhino are now endangered. They're Appendix 2 animals. In Southern Africa, we have in the region of 16 to 18,000, predominantly on private parks. And the black rhinos are predominantly on national and government parks. But those things are, we're trying different methods now of moving the rhinos out of threatened areas where they're being killed, into areas where they can grow at an advanced rate. So in other words, moving them at scale, anything between 10, 20 and 50 animals to a new range, rather than the Noah's Ark type of thing where there's 1 and 2 and time, the race to extinction or de-extinction is so important now that we have to try and breed them at speed, And
is the education of local populations helping curtail any of the, have you seen a decrease in the poaching, or is any of that helping kind of curtail that a little bit?
Yeah. We ask this question all the time because there's nothing worse than, when you talk about demand reduction or you're talking about an awareness campaign and you ask somebody if they know what a rhino is and they say no, they don't, then or do you know why they're being killed? And no, they don't know why you're being killed. And I think the fundamentals of education are, yes, they're being exploited, they're dying, they're being killed for their horn, they're being consumed in Southeast Asia. There's various organizations helping that, to try and curtail that. So the general kid or person in the street knows what the problem is, and they are very sensitive. But I always say, Ken and James, that this problem that we have is that rhinos or their rhino components, be it a horn or a pangolin scale, has now got to such a point in the crime of illegal wildlife trade that the rhino is just becoming another commodity, like a weapon is, or a drug, like Mandrax tablets or something like that. And it's just unfortunate that we've had this beautiful mega herbivore that, is on this planet, and it's being derailed or demystified, or, as being the animal that has value, which is such a pity, and we're trying to avert that by telling people that it's not cool to hurt the animals. The Vietnamese at one stage, when I went there, they weren't that aware that animals suffered in a horn. They thought it was like a deer antler. And I'm sure you all know what a deer antler does. It kind of falls off the animal, and you can pick it up, and grind it into whatever. So rhino horns have to suffer. They don't just fall off,
That was one thing James was telling me about, one of the stories in your book, and I had no idea. I kind of thought that they, were chopping off the horns, and that in the process of capturing it, it was getting wounded or killed. So I understood that extent of it, but he was explaining what could happen of the animal being left and not being able to support itself and its legs collapsing and breaking under it, and that they cut so deep. They don't cut it just like cutting your fingernails or hair. They cut as deep as they can, so into the rhino, and that then they can be left. As much as I knew that it was hurting them and it was a bad thing, I didn't understand the extent to which they went with disregard for the animal to get the horn.
Yeah, I did that experiment. Like, I was just hanging out with my friends, so I decided to just do a little experiment. I asked them, well, how do you think a rhino's poached? And they're like, you just shoot it, right? And I was explaining to them, no, you like shoot it or trank it until it's like just stationary, and then it falls down and can break its legs, and then you cut the horn off.
Right.
So you kill the baby if it's there, just to get it out of the way, I guess, and things like that. And it's like they had no idea. So
yeah. And these are kids we would have assumed did well, but like I didn't know.
Yeah, like
I thought it was just my generation.
I didn't even know. Like I worked, like I've worked at zoos, and like at zoos, we're trying to educate the zoos, AZA zoos, the ones that I work at.
Right.
I want to work at the ones that are focused on conservation and breeding and trying to keep the animals that we have as well as possible, even though we're in a different situation.
Right.
But I still think there's more that we need to learn and teach at the same time, which I realized that like when this was kind of set up, it made me realize that I might be sitting on something very useful, not just because when I started this podcast, I was just like, oh, this will be fun. I have a lot of animal toys. I know about it. I might as well talk about it, right? I can be like, oh, look, this is a buffalo. And this is a bison. They're different.
Right.
I'm so tired of people calling this a buffalo and all that. But now I'm starting to realize that maybe I can do something with this. So that's my
this
hope
education portion has really now, especially since he's been in college, the education portion has become his focus.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Are the only thing I knew growing up, my generation, was that those trying to protect the rhinos would chop off the horn to try and prevent the poachers from wanting to kill. But as I understand it, that hasn't even been successful in preventing the death of some of the rhinos.
It's definitely been a band-aid on the wound. But sometimes the wound doesn't heal, So it has curtailed the poaching enormously. So it really has. But what's happened now is that as we get to all the rhinos having been dehorned, there's still a perceived value on horn. And all the rhinos are dehorned. But guess what? They're growing at 1 inch a year. So there's still rhinos hanging around, and they've got smaller horns, but they're getting longer horns. And when they're in the bush, practically, and they're tracking these animals, they don't give a damn really if it's got a 4-inch horn or a 2-inch horn. And they're chopping and they're killing 3 in place of 2 or 1. So as a result, we're getting, well, this is very new, by the way. It was starting to work because the poachers actually just went to another source of horned animals. Now they're actually finding no horned animals, and they're saying, well, we need to, fulfill our demands to the top guys in Vietnam and Asia, or wherever they are, Southeast Asia, through the middlemen. And we just have to nail anything we can get, because at the end of the day, it's kilograms of contraband. And more animals are suffering as a result. So, that's, I don't say it makes sense, but that's what's actually started to happen now, which we were not aware of 2 or 3 years ago when we started this process.
Right.
Yeah, and then elephants, I know that some populations are starting to almost de-evolve tusks, because like the ones without tusks are surviving because they're not getting poached. Which on one hand is like, oh, the elephants are adapting. That's great. But on the other hand, they had those tusks for a reason.
Yeah, they were important.
So I know that it's like it's just crazy to see all these different effects of poaching.
Yeah, cutting off the rhino's horn is kind of punishing the rhino.
Yeah.
For the
and elephants de-evolving tusk is almost like the same, just different way.
Right.
Yeah.
Are there any other tactics, methods that you guys, beyond the education, that are at least having any short-term success in protection, other than what we discussed, or anything else that people can do, I guess?
Yeah. the other, well, obviously, we've got PSAs, which we call public service announcements. Could be billboards, you know, advertising, campaigns. But then we also, the other stuff that we're working on right now is technology. So, you know, that everybody's been through 3D printing and infusing the horn. The other thing that my brother, being a vet, has been working on is the rhizotope, where they're putting nuclear reactor into the rhino horn, that it can show up in various things. But the experiment was merely to see at this stage, in the first 5 years, whether it would still harm the animal, because we're very aware that it would be beneficial at airport scanners and places, you know, where the nuclear reactor would be able to be activated. But we weren't aware on how it would affect the female or the process of the rhinos in real life, you know, in the wild. So that has gone through, that experiment has happened now, and they are still busy with it, and it's looking pretty good. And the other thing is smartwatches. We've got rhinos on smartwatches now, much the same as your Apple smartwatch. Also designed by various people, but one South African who's been very instrumental in working on a device that actually builds up intelligence of each individual animal, sleep patterns, heat processes, and it gives a color code. We have the new technology in drones now, which fly for longer times with night vision equipment. That's also very vital. And then the other stuff that's happening, obviously, is license plate recognition and networks closing in areas where we are able to identify suspect vehicles on intelligent apps and things, you know, where the database is all talking to reserve owners, provincial owners, South African protected services, the stock theft unit. Everybody collaborating and working together is a vital tool in the toolbox.
Yeah, I also heard that even technology is useful, but also that sometimes more, I guess, old-fashioned ways are useful. Like I was reading your book about how riding on horses is one of the best way for rangers to operate.
Yeah.
Oh, rather than in vehicles?
Yeah, the horses, because it's like quicker response time. They can get into more certain areas and stuff. So that was very interesting to learn about.
Yeah. Yeah, look, there's nothing. Boots and binoculars, they call it boots and binoculars, you know. So and dogs, obviously, dogs are vital because they cannot be bribed. Yes, they obviously need a person to handle them, or a dog handler, a canine handler, we call it. But they've got intelligent noses, so they can pick up scent. They can pick up whether it's a piece of ivory, a rhino horn, you know, a gun, in a car, in the boot, under the wheel, in the engine, all these sort of things. So dogs play a very important part. Unfortunately, with horses, when you fighting a war, horses were always the ideal thing, and they do much more distance. They can go where other vehicles can't go. But when you're restricted with people and time, you've got to have a lot of resources. Being an animal, it cannot just be parked in the shed at night and started the next morning, you know. It gets sick, and it's got to be rotated. You know, like a car engine gets serviced every 10,000 miles, a horse needs to be serviced, you know, 6 hours of the day. So, you know, there are pros and cons. And when you're in a skirmish position, you know, and also lions are fond of a moving horse as well. And that has happened in our history as well. So there are all these things to think about, you know.
Yeah. Have you seen with your efforts the past few years any uptick or successes in new births of the rhinos? What are kind of the successes of the program, to be on the happy note?
Yeah, obviously we wouldn't be doing this if we didn't have the attitude where we're starting to see a difference, and it's almost like, we're trying to do ourselves out of our own employment, by the way.
Right.
But there's enough empathy in the world, and it isn't a waste of money. Some people are very callous in saying, why worry about rhinos when people are getting persecuted and killed, but God gave us all these creatures on this planet, and we don't want to see them disappear, so some of us have to do the job, others
Right.
have to fight wars which maybe they don't want to do.
Right.
Others are away from home, as I do sometimes when I'm traveling into Africa, trying to find new homes for these things, which is, I think, one of the success stories. Africa's lost a lot of its populations, but slowly but surely, as we find little success pockets, we're taking, and I don't say we, me, myself, but organizations are taking these animals back to where they once belonged.
Right.
After the Holocaust of civil war or colonialism, or post-democracy of a despot like maybe Robert Mugabe or Idi Amin, or so there are some places that are really coming back, returning to nature, and every bit of nature needs a rhino or an elephant if it can afford the space, put it that way.
And that's one thing, I guess, that, when I guess this is part of the education process, it's not just we want to save the animal because it's a majestic animal. That's an important piece of it, but it's part of the environment and the ecology. And if that animal disappears,
Yeah,
we know some of the consequences, but there's other consequences we might not yet realize unless that happens. And better to keep the full circle of everything involved.
Yeah, we have the story of the wolves in Yellowstone, which is, I mean, it's told over and over again, and now they're starting to be like, was it that big? If there's all the the little intricacies, but in general, it's like we took out the wolves and the elk got overpopulated, but now we brought them back, and the elk are in control, and that's causing like more animals to come back to where they were. They're pushed out by elk, and there's even like if you go down the chain, it's like
the elk were eating too many trees.
Yeah, even like the streams are starting to change how they move because of the elk eating plants. Like it's all affecting each other. It's not just.
And people don't think about they look at this beautiful animal and they don't think what a tremendous impact it's had on their environment to have it.
Yeah, we find, I mean, in the work in the gorillas that I do in the Congo, there's certain plants that, the gorillas eat, defecate, and they regrow much faster. There's plants like the lala palms in Maputo land where they get eaten by elephants and they regenerate much faster. And elephants are the pathfinders, to control over bush or too much forest, that ants and other little termites can come in and create work for some of the antelopes that can't get to a browse line, for instance. So each animal has its place in the world, and I think we disrupted that for a while, and now we're starting to see the balance, and also big business is starting to play a role now in carbon credits and biodiversity credits, and they're starting to see it as a sustainable planet rather than one that we're just going to destroy and have no remorse for.
Yeah, with my board, I also make games and stories and some of my other stuff. And there's one game I'm working on where like you make teams of hybrid animals. I'm not like just animal hybrids. There's a point to it. And like it's more like a team game and like kind of competing against stuff. And I'm trying to make every animal's parts for these hybrids, quote unquote, be something like unique so people realize, oh, the animals are unique. And then I can use the stories to tell a bit more detail that the games couldn't tell. So the games kind of get them hooked in and kind of show them that even like a little lizard has special things about it that they might not see on the surface. And then as we go into the stories, it can be like, oh, and then it's not as simple as, oh, look, this is my rhino for the video game. I'm going to go rhino around or whatever. It's like, oh, there's this actual creature.
Right.
And so kind of like, and the story of like balancing, like in my lore, it's like in the games of the Fusion Wars, it's that robots with the DNA, but the actual animals are their own thing. Like you need to kind of realize, like, I feel like a lot in America, the problem is that like we have these set ideas.
Yes.
Just because of education and all this stuff. And my goal is to try to be like, yes, we can have these fun games and stuff like that, but I also want to get more, I want to show that things are more complicated.
Yeah. Use the game to gamify the education.
Yeah, but still showcase the actual science and stuff. So I think that might be a route, especially for my generation, because like we'll play a fun game if it's a fun game, and then if we start learning about it, then maybe that can help with the education side of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Have you found that in the reserve you've reached a good balance of prey, predator, things kind of maintain themselves once you get that control, and as much as you can keep the poachers out?
Absolutely, but one has to manage it like you would do a business. If you had a business, for example, you'd have one person making standing at the door, being security, and another one making the tea, and you've got one guy as your lawyer, and then you have a doctor you can call on, and there's the same sort of thing in the wild. There's a couple of lions, and they're eating. If they eat a buffalo, it's a disaster. If they eat a giraffe, it's less of a disaster. But if they eat a warthog, which there are thousands of pumbas and warthogs, one is happy because they're lower down on the food chain. And they kind of balance them out. You do get extremes where you've got a coalition of animals, which is brothers, that hunt together, and they have a preference, like you would probably like a piece of salad or another type of meat. They get ruthless on one species. And you start seeing the demise of that, and it comes out on all your sheets, because like any business, we have ecologists that actually measure every single animal that gets reported killed and born and removed, sold, or bought in. So, and then the pasture, or the felt, what we call the felt, and the tree and the browse line, which is all measured on drones, and vegetation mosaics of what is available for eating and what is actually a pest, and what is savanna and what is riverine, and as that increases or diminishes, so you work out your browser, grazer, mega herbivore balance with your carnivore. So it's an exact science, actually, and it has to be managed because you're in a controlled environment. So unfortunately, sometimes predators have to be overmanaged, and we use things like contraceptives for elephants and lions. Not much in cheetah, because cheetah is quite an endangered animal. And leopard, of course, there are a lot of leopard around, but they become very, very skittish or secluded. And we cannot afford to have an animal that does not present itself to those that are coming to visit.
Right.
Not in a zoo
like
format,
for example.
But yeah.
Go ahead, buddy.
Sorry. All right. So for example, like here, we have to hunt deer to an extent because we've got rid of all the wolves and stuff. We have to hunt deer.
We've eliminated the predators, so now we have to be to keep them healthy.
So it's kind of like how sometimes you have to do things that you don't think are optimal for the overall betterment of the nature. Yeah,
absolutely.
Have you, when you talk about the lions and you'll get that little coalition, and sometimes you do the contraceptive, is it possible to take a coalition of lions like that and relocate some of them, or does that disrupt?
Yeah, unfortunately, that would happen in the wild as well, that would happen because another lion would probably hunt them down and kill them naturally. Now you have a fence system where you've got a coalition of 2 brothers or 3 brothers, and they've got no other natural predators except the other lion on the other side of your preserve. You call it a preserve in America, we call it a reserve. And it's unlikely that the one would fight the other 2 and kill them. They do skirmish each other, but you may then have to intervene and take out one of them. And we're not allowed to euthanize because we are very sympathetic ecotourism product. So euthanizing or selling to a canned hunting or anything like that is not in our vocabulary. It's something that is not even, spoken about. If it goes to another reserve and 3 generations away, it happens to go through some ill-gotten economic means, then we've got no control over it. But because we work with incredible game people, relocators, the first thing they'll ask on the sheet is, what is the history of your animal? What is the import permit? And he has the export permit, where's the import permit, and who's doing the relocation? Very, very important that it goes to a good home. Like you would do if you were in love with your dog, if you immigrated out of Chicago to Illinois, well, not Illinois, but across to Canada or something, and you didn't want to take your fish with you, you'd give it to a good home. So that's the first important thing.
Yeah, for example, zoos around here, like it's very much with AZA zoos, it's a control. We're lucky because with AZA zoos, we have a controlled system where like we send an animal from one AZA accredited facility to another, and we can keep all the animals like kind of more. We can move around things for genetic diversity. We can keep them safe, and we know they're in the set system. But I know it's out there. Obviously, you're saying it's different because I mean we have zoos and then we have the wild. Well, you kind of have this almost middle ground of a preserve kind of thing.
I guess that's a good point on genetic diversity. Do you run into any issues within the preserve since you are effectively containing the animals with genetic diversity?
Yeah, so we're swapping genetics all the time, like you're doing in the zoos. And I've been to Toronto Zoo. I've just been to Miami Zoo, San Diego, a lot of the zoos across America, and they're extremely well run. And they play a vital, important component in conservation. I may have mentioned in my book, Saving the Lost Rhinos, that I was very much against zoos, but I was referring to Baghdad and Kinshasa and the Ivory Coast, where I've had limited experience or incredibly bad experiences of zoos that are either war-torn, post-democracy, and they are, I wouldn't even like to call the language on this medium because they are terrible. That's the thing we don't need in conservation of any sort. But the actual gene pool and the role that zoos have in the Americas and across the world may even save a species one day. So, but I think those species, as some of them are doing, like the Aspinall Foundation, some people are really doing good work. Back to Africa is another one where they're taking those animals and putting them back into Africa in excess places. The bongo, I know they're doing it in Kenya as well. So they are able.
So that's keeping that gene pool fresh in Africa in the reserves and
reestablishing, more population of numbers that are declining below the impetus line of the curvature of growth in the wild, put it that way. And it's a slow process.
Yeah.
The process of rewilding is slow because it needs a step process. You can't just take a captive bred animal of any sorts and put it straight back into a wild with other predators. And a high tick load or parasite level, it may just succumb.
Yeah, first of all, you did mention that there's like that some of our zoos are good, but because the thing is, I guess I heard this from a teacher. There's like conservation zoos, and then there's other zoos, which I think that's an important point. Is that we need to start distinguishing. Not every zoo is the same. Not every preserve is the same.
Right.
Not every company is the same. Like,
right.
I feel like we kind of, especially in America, we have this idea that like all zoos are the same, and all this are the same, and all that, and we need to be like, oh, there's these good zoos that do conservation work and protect the species and may save a species, and then there's Bob's Zoo down the street that just has a bird in a cage. And you're like, well, that's not cool.
Yeah. I think just overall being more discerning,
yeah,
but also through the education, having the information so that we can be more discerning.
Yeah.
So I think the education in anything, but particularly in this, is a big deal. Because like you said, here in America, so many of us are so far removed from it. The only experience most Americans have with any of these animals is they've seen one in a cage in a zoo, where a zookeeper goes in and feeds it twice a day, and that's the extent of their knowledge. You know.
Well, rather that than nothing at all. You know.
Yes.
So,
and especially the zoos I work at, we're really pushing for education and like ambassador animals. Like, if an animal's up to it, too. Also, there's a lot of with animals in specific. It's like, are they up for it? Like, that's another thing I like about AZA zoos is like, it's also kind of funny, especially it's like, all right, coyote, time to go for your training. They don't come out, and you're just kind of like, okay, we'll do it tomorrow. It's kind of, that's kind of not only is it good for the animals, it's good for education. It's also just kind of this little fun dynamic of like, oh, we'll wait till tomorrow.
That actually makes me think of a hypothetical situation. So there's 2 rhinos. They've had a calf. Is it called a calf?
I
had a calf,
right?
And poaching happens to the adults. Would you in that case intervene, or is it okay? I didn't know if then bringing it in to interact with humans would defeat the putting it back out, or what kind of happens in that scenario?
Yes and no. Interact with humans, we have to, or interact with a surrogate, which can be another rhino, or sometimes a sheep, or sometimes an elephant baby, depending on what you've got, because they're extremely dependent on a friend or a surrogate mother. Yes, they're getting the milk because you're providing the milk with a bottle, but they're needing extreme care, all times of the night. So we have various orphanages in South Africa. Some of them have got many, and they're very, very well run. Most of them are very well run. The ones that aren't well run obviously fall by the wayside. And they're extremely important. However, we are trying to steer away from orphanages, but they are necessary to have, unfortunately. And they do cost an enormous amount of money. So they have become almost a commercial center where people need to pay to go and not touch them and maybe feed them, but feed them through a barrier where the human intervention is far less than the animal human TLC, tender loving care. It's got to keep that boundary, and the rewilding process has to be more strict, at a certain level. Because we've had many orphaned animals of various varieties, bushbuck, nyala, black wildebeest have come back, and rhinos have come back and actually killed their masters. So a wild animal is a wild animal, and it's vitally important to understand that. I know, there's a fine line between when they've had enough for you and when they decide to kill you.
Yeah, that's the thing at zoos. It's very much like, especially for carnivores and larger animals, there's protected contact, and that's another thing. We're told to not personify them too much. I mean, obviously, we get to know their personalities as working with the animals, and we get to know their inner workings, and we can understand more of their body language and when they're having fun or whatever. But we have to try to communicate that, like, yes, we have a bond with this animal and we work with it, but it's still a wild animal. And even if I have a really good relationship with this lion, if I go into its habitat, things probably won't go
it can
well.
change its mind.
That's another thing. Like another thing is I feel like we need to explain that like these animals aren't just like us. They don't view the world like us. So we have to kind of explain that and how like yes, we have this animal and we have a good bond with it. It's not like our dog where we can just go pet it. There's boundaries and stuff like that.
Well, and I try and encourage people around here. The only opportunity to get up and close to really experience these animals is like a behind the scenes at the zoo. But to be able to go to somewhere like where you are, to go to a preserve and actually see the animals in their natural habitat. And I provide the example of I've gone for years since I was little and seen lions at the zoo and thought, oh, they're really big. But he took me to a behind the scenes where we stood 4 feet from a lion. It was an older lion, so it was getting some food or something. So we were able to sit and observe that. But standing 4 feet from it, I never realized how large and impressive these animals are because I'd never been that close to one to say that its paw was this big, that had never struck me. And I think that that's important for people to realize it's not just a big cuddly stuffed animal. It's a majestic beast. And I can say even at my age that impacted me,
Yeah, look, I mean, touch, feel, impact, dart, work, lift. If you lifted the buffalo, I mean, when eland, for example, eland is the largest antelope in Africa, right? Yeah, it takes 12 grown men, to lift or slide, not even to lift, just slide, because we dart them and then we use the apron with handles on it and roll them over and then lift them literally 2 inches off the ground and slide them onto a trailer and then a conveyor which pulls them into a trailer, and that's how we relocate small amounts. But the bigger animals or the herd animals get herded in funnels with a helicopter, which is also
that's gotta be harder because like in zoos it's like we can train the animal to go into a certain spot. If it's small enough, maybe we can teach it to go into a certain carrier, or maybe we can bring it back into like its sleep area and then we can dot it and then we can pick it up. But you guys, you might have to get one out of the bush, like, so it's very different.
I think that's another good demonstration of the go ahead.
No, everything is done by helicopter in Africa. Without a helicopter, you're done. You cannot operate. Unfortunately,
I was thinking for the intelligence of the animals. Again, a lot of people just think of them as, oh, they're just a beast. They eat, they sleep. That's what they do. They reproduce. But to see the understanding of them, some of the animals, particularly the ones that are maybe have been wounded to the point that they can't be put back out in the wild. So some of the wildlife refuges that he works at, they make them education animals so they can come in. And to see the intelligence and understanding of these animals and go, okay, it's not just a eat, sleep, reproduce beast. It does understand the world around itself. There is, people I think sometimes don't get, they just look at it, oh, it's just a rhino, it's standing there eating grass. And they don't think about everything it's thinking about.
Every animal has a personality, Some are, they're like us. They're all different, Some of them are angry, some are passive, some are formed habits, some bad habits, some good habits, some tame habits, some aggressive. So I guess we're all the same, we go to the same bar or with the same coffee shop or the same restaurant, Theirs are just vastly different.
Well, and that they get to know their neighborhood. Where the predators kind of hang out and sleep and where everybody is, who everybody is.
For example, at a wildlife rescue that I volunteer at sometimes, they have a sandhill crane. Its partner sadly passed away, but this male, he only allows women to work in his enclosure. If a guy goes in, he gets all wild up. So like obviously there's just uniqueness. Like obviously there's something going on there.
Something happened.
It's very true that happens.
you have any other questions about Rhino? I don't want to keep him too long because we've got him. I know it's coming up on the evening dinner time at his place, but any other questions about the rhinos or thoughts or anything? I know if we want to, support the program, obviously I would love to get him out there sometime to actually go visit and see it. And the Galapagos is coming up this year, but maybe in a future year.
Yeah, that's lucky. I get to go with my school. They set up and everything.
Yeah, so a bit of a guided tour out to the Galapagos and see everything.
Yeah,
and of course, if you're ever in the Chicago area again, we'd love to meet you in person. Take you out and pick your brain a little bit. That would be awesome.
I'll definitely do that. I'd love to meet you, and I have a couple of people in Chicago, but I landed there in end of October to get to Philadelphia. I was doing a talk in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
So it was the connection via Dubai, I think. So
yeah. Chicago is kind of the hub. We're the air, land, water hub, kind of.
In
the middle of the country.
But if I know people, if I know people like you, and there's a gig at a zoo or an evening talk with books or anything like that, I'm happy to do it if you kind of put it together,
Absolutely. Yeah, and we'll be getting this out to our followers and promote it up a little bit, because like I said, this is his big. He's going to for a degree in biology with a side track in zoology. So this is his big thing, animal education, and just teaching people.
Day job working at an AZA zoo, taking care of animals. Night job producing videos and games and books about animal education.
Yeah, to kind of spread the word.
Yeah.
So if you need any other footage of cutaways or animals or anything like that while we're talking, I mean, my face is a bit boring.
Actually, if you have anything, I can pull stuff off the website, but if you have anything that you can send over, that would be great. So that we can add in, particularly on the particularly on the preserve, and some of the programs that you run there. That would be great, to kind of share out a little bit. So and if you try and send them and the files are too big, I can give you ways to send us more files so we can on email kind of work out if something won't come through.
You can't do a WhatsApp because it's too low, eh? You want to high res.
We don't typically use WhatsApp, so I went into WhatsApp, loaded it back up with my account, and I used one of your phone numbers that said it was active and tried to send a message, and I immediately got you've been temporarily kicked off WhatsApp because you're spamming. So I must have typed your number wrong or something.
I don't worry.
It went to somebody else.
No, it's fine. I know that you use we can use WeTransfer or something like that,
Yeah, I've got some links there, so I could send you WeTransfer, or I've got services here of a link I can send you that you can upload anything.
I'm the animal guy. He's the tech guy.
Yeah.
He has no idea what I'm talking about. I have no idea what he's talking about.
Yes.
Look, I'm not good at tech. If you give me a Dropbox, I freeze.
Yes.
Okay. If you give me WeTransfer or even a Google Drive.
Google Drive. That would be we'll use that one if we need to. Yeah, that would be perfect.
Those are complicated for me as well, because my Google is normally so overloaded with shit. I cannot put another thing on it, not even another email.
Right.
So, and don't ask me for a password because I'm anti-passwords.
Right. Yeah. I don't think anybody remembers their passwords anymore.
I'd rather give them
every time you go to log in, you do forgot my password.
The amount of the amount of YouTube sponsorships are like, get this password manager now. It's
but if you're needing any file footage of great stuff, I've just been now on the reserve for the last 14 days. I'm actually doing other work tomorrow, so
Okay. All right. Well, appreciate your time. Very much appreciate your time. Sorry about the technical issues, and thank you for kind of making this work this evening. Appreciate it.
No problem at all. I enjoyed talking to you, and I hope it can be of any help to you somewhere.
Absolutely.
And this was nice because it made me realize that maybe this isn't just a thing for me. Maybe I can actually make something out of this and maybe actually have some impact on the world, even if it's a small one.
Yeah. And starting now at your age, you've got an opportunity to really, make some impact. So,
great. No, every journey starts with a single step, or, so
right.
Take it.
All right. All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have a good evening. And I'll email you off. We'll coordinate stuff. All right.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you.
hope that it wasn't too noisy because it's kind of raining here quite hard.
Oh, no. It's perfect. Yeah, and we'll put something pretty behind you when we put the final video.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Awesome.
Have a good
Pleasure,
evening.
Matt. Thanks, eh?
Okay.
All right then.
Bye-bye.
Bye.